Happy Wednesday, everybody, and welcome in to here on Gamecock Central. Hope you're having a great day so far. It is good to be back with Jack Veltri here today. We missed last week. Unfortunately, Jack was out of town, and now we are back. So that's all that matters. It's good to be here, Jack. I hope that you are doing well. What's going on?
Not much, Kendall. Everything's been good. It's been kind of nice getting back into the swing of things. Took some time off last week since spring football ending, baseball being what it is. It's been a busy spring, and ready for the back half of baseball season here, the last final stretch here, and then it's on to summer. So, but how are you doing? You doing well?
Doing well. Everything is going great over here. We got a lot of baseball going on. We got playoff hockey starting in the city of Charlotte next week. So everything is good. Beautiful weather outside right now. And like I said, we hope everyone that is tuning in is doing well too. But Jack, I hope you enjoyed the vacation. Did you go anywhere? Like, were we
Yeah,
out of town or were we?
yeah. So no surprise here. Went back to Disney for a few days. Uh, so long story short, I was in Texas, I think, a few weeks ago for baseball, and Caroline, my girlfriend, like told me that like her spring break's coming up, and she kind of had the itch to go to Disney, and I'm kind of like, I kind of feel the same way. I wouldn't mind going back, so we kind of just decided, spur of the moment, like we're gonna go in a few weeks. Like South Carolina had just gotten the three worst losses I think I've seen in a weekend, and I'm like, all right, I'm ready to take a few days off here and just decompress from not covering, the team for a few days here. And so I was in Florida for all last week, did not go on my computer much at all. And it was absolutely wonderful. But now we're back, we're refreshed. It's taken a few days to kind of get back into the swing of things, but we're here, we're ready to roll. And but no, it's good to hear that you're doing well.
Yeah, I'm glad you had so much fun, Jack. That's awesome. You deserve some time off. You've been working very hard. And for everyone that's like, summer's coming up. So that means no college sports. Yes, that is true. But so much football talk is happening in the summer. Of course, you have SEC Media Days as well, official visits that are happening at South Carolina. So there's still a lot to be covered in summer. It's really, truly year round. And Jack is always doing a great job. So we appreciate it. You're doing great, Jack. And I'm glad that you enjoyed some time over at Disney World in Orlando. But today we are talking South Carolina. We're going to talk a little baseball. We're going to talk a little basketball as well. And who knows, usually we end up throwing some football in there too. But before we do, Jack, let's give a shout out to our presenting sponsor of today's show.
Yep. So let's talk about Clint Hammond of CMG Home Loans. So if you are in the market to buy a home, maybe you are ready to take that next step and buy your dream home, but it's a busy, complicated process. So maybe you just don't know where to begin or where to start. Well, got good news for you. Clint can help you out. He's been in the mortgage industry for a very long time now. And here's some other good things to know. He's a lifelong Gamecock fan, and he's also a longtime supporter of Gamecock Central. So you're in the right hands with a guy like Clint. He's going to help you out through the process, take you through it step by step, and get you on the right path to buying that future dream home you've always wanted. So if you're interested, give him a call, 803-422-6797. The NMLS number for him is 71597. Or, as always, go to ClintHammond.com for more information.
All right, Jack, let's talk some baseball here on the show. This season has not gone as many people have expected. There have been some definite low points in the season, and certainly a low point for South Carolina comes with some of the recent injury news that we've heard. So Ethan Petry, we got an update on his injury from pulmonary. He's got a shoulder problem right now. The way that they described it was a strain of the AC joint in his left shoulder. So that's obviously extremely tough for South Carolina to lose a guy like that. And it could potentially be the rest of the season that Petry is out. I'll let you get into that in just a second. But Nathan Hall as well, he's battling a heel injury. So South Carolina hit with the injury bug at this point in the season. It's already been a rocky season for the Gamecocks. But Jack, your reactions to these injuries and the updates we received yesterday from pulmonary.
It's unfortunate, right? It's been a year where not much has gone right. The season has been very disappointing, I would say. Like, yes, they're 6 games over 500, but in the grand scheme of things, they are 5-16 in the SEC, and that's nothing really to be too thrilled about. And they've dealt with the injury bug for pretty much this entire season. It's been a little bit of up and down in terms of guys going on the shelf for a little bit, and your two star players are hurt at a pivotal time where you have a few weeks left in the regular season. You're trying to salvage the season, go on a little bit of a run here, maybe win a few games, and go to Hoover in a few weeks. Maybe try to go win the SEC tournament, which is what you're probably going to need to do to make it to the postseason. But it's going to be tough to do it potentially without your two top hitters. With Ethan, it seems like he is potentially going to be done for the year because, as Paul Mainieri was telling the media yesterday, it's about a 2 to 4 week recovery time to heal the AC joint strain in his left shoulder, which occurred over the weekend at Kentucky when, if you remember, he ran into the right field wall on a fly ball, and it kind of messed his shoulder up a little bit. He took his next at bat, but when he was swinging the bat, just didn't look comfortable, and then he came out of the game. The last few games, he's been wearing a sling over that left arm. So, like I said, it's about a 2 to 4 week recovery time. Now, if it's on the shorter end of the recovery, if it's like 2 weeks to heal, that puts him about at LSU week, the final weekend of the regular season, where he could potentially come back. He could also maybe come back for the SEC tournament. But the way I kind of look at it is, assuming he is able to recover in a quick amount of time, or even if not, is it worth it to come back right now? Because as we all know, the team has definitely been struggling this entire year. They haven't really shown you that they can string together series wins consistently in the SEC. They are at the bottom of the standings, right ahead of Missouri, who's still winless at 0-21. I just don't know if there's much reason for Ethan to play other than the fact of he just loves the game. He loves playing for South Carolina. But thinking about his future a little bit, he could easily be picked in one of the early rounds of the MLB draft here later this summer. Why run the risk of getting hurt again or potentially injuring himself any worse than he already is? There's 10 games left to go in the regular season, and then the probability of being one and done in Hoover seems very high considering it's single elimination. I just don't see the need to run the risk of getting hurt anymore. And then as for Nathan Hall, go back to a few weeks ago at Texas A&M. I think it was the middle game of the series on that Friday when they lost 17-0. There was a grand slam hit to center field that Hall's trying to track it down. He's running to the wall in center field, and he whacks his heel, as Mainieri put it, into the wall, and it kind of has been lingering ever since. He's still been a very productive player for South Carolina, but you could tell he's kind of playing hurt at this point. And so he missed yesterday's game. He missed the game. He missed the game the day after he got hurt against A&M. And so we'll see when he's coming back. It could be this weekend, according to Mainieri. The hope is that he's going to be able to play on Friday. But it's one of those things where you kind of have to let it heal. But at this juncture in the season, I think they're going to try to just let him probably play through it at this point. And we'll see what happens. But it's very unfortunate right now that those two guys are down. And we saw it's a one-game sample size, but we saw what the offense looked like yesterday. And I would not be confident in that group going out there and playing the way they did yesterday consistently, because the way they were able to manufacture runs, they only had a 2-run single, and everything else kind of was out of their own control. I mean, there was a bad pickoff throw that led to a run. There was a wild pitch that led to a run. And then there was a bases-loaded walk that got a third run in. So just very not productive when they weren't putting the ball in play. They were 1 for 9 with runners in scoring position yesterday. So when your two big thumpers are not in the lineup, it kind of shows that this offense is very weak outside of Hall and Petrie.
Yeah, Hall and Petrie certainly the core of this offense for South Carolina's team this season. So unfortunate circumstances for both of them. Obviously, Mainieri a little bit more optimistic with Hall and that he'll be able to come back. As you said, with Petrie, we just don't know. And it is one of those things where, do you run the risk of coming back? He's already put up pretty good numbers this season. So do you run the risk of coming back when you do have that opportunity to be drafted fairly early on in the 2025 MLB draft. We will have to see. Head over to GamecockCentral.com. Jack will keep you updated with all of these injuries over there, so be sure to check it out. But we certainly wish both of them a very speedy recovery. And it's just a bummer for South Carolina, like as this year continues, and you just have to deal with these constant lows throughout the season. It's very hard to rebound from that as a team from a morale standpoint. So you feel for the group. They expected more this year. It hasn't gone as they have expected. Like you said, 10 games left in the regular season. So you hope you can finish it out on a strong note. But we know the expectation for South Carolina baseball, and South Carolina fans really care about South Carolina baseball, and they remember the days of South Carolina baseball being elite and the best of the best and winning College World Series titles. And unfortunately, South Carolina going to certainly have to rebuild after this season. We'll see what Paul Mainieri can do with the group and hopefully hit the portal and try to get something going, Jack.
Yeah, it really has just been that kind of year where seemingly nothing has gone right. Now, to South Carolina's credit, for all the issues that they've had this season, the one thing you really can't fault them for is the fact that they've beaten the teams that they're quote-unquote supposed to beat. So they're 21-0 this year against teams that you could consider quad 2 through quad 4 teams. So the only midweek loss they have is North Carolina. They've won every other midweek game that they're supposed to, and they swept all the weekend series besides Clemson. Clemson's the only exception. So they swept Sacred Heart, Milwaukee, Morehead State. They took care of business in those weekends. And then obviously, like I said, they took care of the midweek games. And they only have one more left against Winthrop. So they have a really good chance here to handle their business against all the teams that they're supposed to beat. The problem here is that that's fine and all, but they're not beating the top flight competition that they're facing every single weekend. And they only have one series win against an SEC team, or if you want to include Clemson into that mix. I mean, I think they're 1-8 now in weekend series that are not the 3 non-conference series outside of Clemson that I mentioned. Like, Ole Miss is your only series win, and you've been swept 3 times now. It's been a very, I don't want to say uncharacteristic, because we didn't fully know what to expect with this team this year, considering it's a new coach, it's a lot of new faces on this roster, but you can tell, like, this is a group that needs a lot of work here in the offseason. And again, I don't expect South Carolina to make the postseason. I don't expect them to go on a miraculous run here over the final 9 SEC games that you have left, because you have Florida this weekend, who is playing much better baseball as of late, even though they are still kind of in the middle of the pack towards the bottom of the SEC standing since they got off to such a horrendous start. Then you go to Auburn next week. I think that's going to be a really tough weekend, considering the Tigers are a top 10 team right now, and they are a real perennial contender, I think, in my opinion, that could make a run in the postseason here. And then you close out the year with a really, really good LSU team. So it's going to be tough. I think at this point, with Petrie, I don't see the need for him to play these final 10 games or whatever. Just recover, heal. If for some reason South Carolina does, they probably need to go 8-1 over the final 9 conference games to get to a chance where they are in postseason contention. That would put them at about 13 wins and go on a little bit of a run in Hoover. You can get yourself right into this conversation, but what are the odds they're actually going to do that, So for that reason, I don't see the need to rush Petrie back out there when he's got a future beyond South Carolina here in a few months at the MLB draft, even though he hasn't officially declared yet, but he is eligible to be drafted. So I don't know. We'll see what happens there. But, yeah, it's been a real rough ride for South Carolina this year. I don't know what to expect with the Gators coming into town this weekend, but you got to find a way to take 2 out of 3 or potentially sweep the series. I mean, you really have no more room for error at this point. I mean, it's got to be like a sweep here, a sweep there. Maybe you can drop a game somewhere, but I mean, you can't be going into these weekends winning 2 out of 3 at this point. You really need to find a way to sweep. And I mean, any series lost now at this point almost certainly will officially kind of end any chance you have, unless you go on a big run in the postseason in Hoover.
Nothing to lose and everything to prove, really, at this point for South Carolina, if they even want to have an opportunity at being considered for the postseason. But this is an interesting point brought up here. You kind of felt like at the start of the season, or at least I did, when the news came out about Eli Jersenbeck, that, okay, this is not the way that you want to start off the year. The vibes are low when you hear that a guy that's supposed to be a key part of your pitching rotation is dealing with another elbow injury. So you get that at the top of the season for South Carolina. And then you kind of feel like things just start to unravel from there. But Jack, from your perspective as someone that covers this team day in and day out, how much of it do you think was kind of the injuries just from the jump of the season, maybe affecting the morale of the group, versus this is just kind of how it is and how it was going to be this year with the SEC competition that you're facing?
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, there's no doubt they've been impacted by injuries this year. Like you said, Eli Jersenbeck, who Paul Mainieri viewed as his Friday night guy last summer or even before the injury flared up. I mean, that was going to be the plan. Like, Eli was going to be the Friday night starter. Like, if you looked at like projecting what the rotation would have looked like at the beginning of the preseason, Eli's that number one guy. Now, he had a really rough preseason, and a lot of that had to do with the elbow injury he sustained. But yeah, that kind of led way to a few more big injuries. Like, Talon LeCroy has been banged up this entire season, and he might come back next year, considering he is under the required amount. The highest number of games you can play is 18 before losing any chance of redshirting. So he played 17 this year, so he's going to have the option to come back. But it's like, does he want to? He's a 4-year guy. Does he want to move on with his life? That's a whole nother thing to kind of consider. But yeah, I mean, injuries have really hurt this team. And, Ethan and Nathan being hurt right now at the same time with a few weeks left to go in the year, it's not ideal. But I don't think injuries are the sole reason why. It's one thing if all the guys were hurt on the team. Like, that would be one thing. But for the most part, like, outside of a few key guys, they have been able to stay decently healthy this year. I just think it's more so a combination of a lot of things. I think the coaching staff has been all right. I don't think it's been anything like eye-popping. Like, I don't agree with all the decisions that have been made this year. I don't like the consistently changing lineup that comes every single game. Like, it's just like you don't know who's going to start on a daily basis. That's an issue. The same deal with the weekend rotation continues to flip-flop all the time. And then it's like, just in-game decisions I don't think have been the best either. But it's not just that. I think it's also just the talent not performing to the level that we know they can. Like, for as good as Ethan Petrie's been this year, I expect so much more out of him in terms of the power production he can bring to the table. The same can be said for a guy like Kennedy Jones. At this point of the season, he's only got 2 home runs, and he really hasn't done much offensively. Like, he's hitting a little bit under 260. This is a guy that was hitting near 300 last year. And for as much as the power wasn't really there, he only had like 9 home runs. He was still a guy in the middle of the order you knew you could count on as a reliable bat. And I just have not seen that this year. And the same can be said for some other guys in this lineup. So it's really just a combination of things. They are what they are at this point. They're just not a very good team. And some of that may have to do with the evaluations that the coaching staff did when they first came in here, keeping some guys. And I'm not sure, but there's a handful of things that you could really chalk up to the reason why the season has gone the way it has. And we'll see what the offseason brings, but whether it's change or retooling the roster, I do expect things to look a lot different as we go into the 2026 season here next year.
Well, we can talk about woulda, coulda, shoulda all we want at this point in the year, but at the end of the day, just 10 games left in the regular season for the South Carolina baseball team. Hasn't gone the way that they've wanted, but they do have the opportunity to finish strong. So stay up to date with everything over on GamecockCentral.com about the baseball team. But Jack, let's go ahead and talk some basketball here. We've talked enough baseball. Let's move on. Different sport, different vibes. And South Carolina getting the news yesterday that Cam Scott will be returning to the Gamecocks after originally entering the transfer portal. How do you think South Carolina pulled this one off? Like, if you are Lamont Paris, how are you convincing these guys that originally put their names in the portal, like, hey, come back and be with us? And then they're saying, yeah.
I was I was on radio this morning with Wes Mitchell, and he kind of brought up a good point that there was a feeling out process in terms of like the two sides, like meaning Cam Scott and his team, kind of with South Carolina coming to a point where they decided to start talking again and kind of get a feel for like where they're at and maybe that they need each other, right? And I think with Cam, he obviously had a ton of offers from other schools, not just coming out of high school, but in this this transfer portal cycle when he put his name into the portal earlier at the beginning of the month. And it's not that he couldn't have taken an offer elsewhere. Like there were other schools interested in him, some from the ACC, some even from the SEC. But I think ultimately at the end of the day, he is a hometown kid. He's from Lexington. I think the opportunity at South Carolina there's still a lot of potential there that I feel like is kind of untapped at this point. Like we did not get to see what he really could do last year, and some of that has to do with the lack of minutes he played. Some of that has to do with him maybe just not being fully ready for playing in the SEC. I think there's a lot of experience that he could still gain, and there's a lot of development that's needed. And I think being up at South Carolina last year and kind of going through that was probably a humbling experience for sure. But I think being here in Columbia, staying with the Gamecocks, I think is the right move for him, not just because it's his hometown school. I think he can also really develop here with the Gamecocks and maybe take a big step forward in year two, heading into his sophomore year. But I think the big thing for him is that he's got to adjust. He's got to do something different here in the offseason, whether it's adding on a little bit more weight to his game, maybe, trying to become that better defender that they need him to be. I think he showed a little bit of flashes last year. I think the SEC tournament is a good example of that, where I think he had like 8 points in 16 minutes and made some nice plays defensively. That's a really small sample size, though, because most part last year, we just didn't get to see him on the floor a good bit, or his minutes were kind of just in garbage time. So you want to see more of that. You want to see more productivity. But I do like the fact that he's back for this year, and it now puts you at a point where you only have one more scholarship left to fill. I think it was maybe 2 weeks ago, Kendall, you and I were talking on here we were talking about Trace and Eagles staff and the fact of, all right, you got 5 scholarship spots left to fill. The portal is going to be closing the week after. I mean, you have a lot to do in a short amount of time. And it seems like right now they have one more spot left to fill. We'll see what happens with Miles Studi and if that is the way they go about filling the final spot, or if they already basically consider him to fill one of the spots and they have another spot open. They're doing a very good job, I think, with what they have had to work with. And, losing Eagle staff wasn't ideal, but getting Cam Scott back, you bring in Abu Yarma earlier this week from Moravian Prep. I like the direction they are heading with this team. I think it's going to be a very young team, but bringing a guy like Cam Scott back, I think it's a welcome addition.
Yes, that was my next point, Jack, and I'm so glad you brought it up because 2 weeks ago, you and I were sitting here and we're like, time is ticking and we're a little bit scared. And I think I asked you the question, like, what is your stress level right now for Lamont Paris and this group? And you said, I'm a little nervous. I think they're going to figure it out. But obviously at that point, people were like, okay, what's going on here? So yes, we need to give credit where credit is absolutely due. Shout out to Lamont Paris and his staff for getting so much done over the last couple of weeks. It's really been a total 180, it feels like, for South Carolina from what we were talking about a couple of weeks ago in terms of filling those roster spots that we were worried about, and not just worried about filling them, but worried about getting guys that you felt like were quality guys that fit within your program. That was a huge point of emphasis that you and I were talking about a couple of weeks ago, Jack. So my next question to you is, how are you feeling right now with the state of what this roster looks like heading into next season? And how well do you feel like these players that South Carolina has picked up will fit within the program?
Well, I'll answer the second part of the question first. I think what we have seen here in the offseason, it's tough to tell how this is going to translate over to the games, just because, if you asked me at this time last year what I thought of South Carolina's roster heading into this past season, I would have been like, all right, they're coming off a 26-win year. They made the NCAA tournament. They got some pieces back, but they've also replaced a lot of what they did lose. I think they're going to be pretty good. They're going to probably win 20 games. I think that's what I had as my prediction for last season and them getting back to the NCAA tournament. Obviously, that did not happen. And I think coming into this next season here, I like what they've brought in. I think it fits a lot more of what Paris is looking for in terms of guys that fit his style of basketball. Number one, you have to play defense here at South Carolina. Otherwise, you're not going to see the floor consistently. So I think they've brought in some guys that can help out with that. Now, if they still had Tracy and Eagle staff, I would have said, all right, there's your flashy scorer right there. I don't think they have. They brought in Meechie Johnson. Like that's going to be the main scoring threat that you have on your team heading into this next season here, as well as Eli Ellis and other guys like that. But I feel like these guys, they may not be the flashiest names, but they're guys that are going to be what Lamont has in store to win basketball games. Like when you think back to 2 years ago, guys that were brought in were Talon Cooper and BJ Mack, Stephen Clark, and obviously you had Meechie back for another year 2 seasons ago. Those weren't the flashiest names, but they did exactly what their role required them to do. Talon Cooper was your floor general, the guy that could go out there and you know what he's going to do in terms of his assist to rebound ratio. And he's going to go out there and get you a few buckets and be the best distributor possible. BJ Mack may not be the greatest, 6'7" forward ever, but he's going to go out there, hit some threes, and serve the role that he's supposed to do. So I think that's what we're going to see here with this team right now going into next season is guys that are going to really fit their roles well. And I don't know what that means in terms of on-court success. Again, the SEC, while I don't think it's going to be as incredible as it was this past season here, I think they're going to be – I think the SEC is still going to be very much a competitive conference where South Carolina, a lot of these games they lost were close games this season. If they can kind of flip that to where 2 seasons ago they're winning all the close games, if they can get back to that point, they're going to be right in the hunt to be in the postseason. And we'll see how the non-conference schedule does shake out here. I know they're going to be playing in that Greenbrier tip-off tournament this upcoming season against teams like Butler and Virginia out in West Virginia this next season here. But I think it's still early to say what the season is going to look like. But I will admit, I do think they've done about as good as they can outside of losing Eagle staff. I think they've done everything they've needed to do in order to try to improve this team.
Well, we always say it, the transfer portal will take and it will give as well. And this is a question brought up by Big Red here. Do you feel like the recruits that South Carolina has brought in at this point offsets who they lost to the portal?
Absolutely. No doubt about it. So thinking about it this way, for the most part, the entire roster is going to look significantly different next year. Now, the only guys you are certainly bringing back are Jordan Butler, a rising junior forward who's a 7-footer, showed some flashes last year, could shoot the 3 ball a little bit, and he played like about 15, 20 minutes a game. Not too bad. So I like what he can do potentially next year as a starter, maybe be another role player type of guy. And then you have Cam Scott coming back, and then we'll see about Miles Studi. But those are the only players that are going to be back next season from this past year's team. Other than that, the entire roster looks different. So aside from Colin Murray-Boyles, the top player from last year, you knew that the odds of him going to the NBA draft were very likely, given that he had such a good year. And, I mean, who knows with South Carolina. They just did not have a good season last year, and maybe some of that kind of played into, like, not knowing what the future would look like in terms of what the team was going to be. So you lost him, but you also kind of lost a lot of the pieces from last year's team. And when you only win 12 games, something's obviously wrong. And a lot of the players, it's not that they weren't talented, but they just weren't getting the job done. And I kind of think going into this offseason, I think Paris and his staff kind of just decided, like, hey, we need to move on from a lot of these pieces that we had and kind of just start fresh. And I kind of see that as what we're seeing here. Like, they have a nice, talented high school recruiting class coming in, obviously led by guys like Eli Ellis, and then you have Hayden Assemi and Grant Polk, EJ Walker, and then Abu Yarma, who I just mentioned a little bit earlier, coming in. But then the portal, I think you really went out and got a lot of what you needed from a forward and guard standpoint. And I know the one thing that this team seemingly doesn't have is a true point guard. But I think a guy like, Mike Sharva Yamitz could potentially play that role coming in from Utah. And then you also have, Michi Johnson, who has played that point guard spot before for South Carolina. He could easily fill that role too. So I do like everything they brought in. I think this team is going to be better than what we saw last year, just from a talent standpoint, as well as it all translating to wins on the court. But still very early. Time will tell if that is the case. But I don't think it can get much worse than how last year went from, a wins-loss standpoint.
Yeah, certainly a disappointing season for South Carolina last year. So you only hope to go up from here. But Jack, you're doing a great job again covering men's basketball. So everyone head over to GamecockCentral.com. So a couple of question marks there to see kind of how this roster truly pans out. But you feel like you have a really good idea of what it's going to look like heading into this upcoming season. Jack, let's talk a tiny bit of football before we leave. An exciting last weekend, watching some guys from the South Carolina football program get drafted. That was awesome. Some guys getting mini camp invites. Just quickly, before we get out of here, what were your overall thoughts on the NFL draft and the guys from South Carolina that are getting their opportunity?
Yeah, as expected, so many guys have seemingly gotten, offers, and they were drafted. Like, it's very cool to see South Carolina reaping the rewards of such a great season last year. And you saw that in the NFL draft. Now, I'm not going to lie, I was a little bit surprised that Nicky Minwari did not go in the first round of the draft last Thursday. I thought he was for sure going to be a mid to late first round pick. And then he didn't go in the first round. And it's kind of the talk of, the South Carolina, community that, Nick didn't go in the first round. What's up with that? And then he ends up going 35th overall to the Seattle Seahawks in the second round. So very cool to see Nick get drafted. And then it kind of just rolled on from there as you had two more guys go in the second round, with TJ Sanders going to the Bills and then Demetrius Knight going to the Cincinnati Bengals. And then obviously day 3, you get Kyle Kennard and Tonka Hemingway picked in the draft in the later rounds. And then in the UDFAs and rookie minicamp invites and all that, so many guys have gotten offers, in that sort of way. You have O'Donnell Fortune going to the Giants. You have, Kai Kroger getting a handful of minicamp invites. I think Mike Yuva had put it out last week or over the weekend that Kai has gotten like 7 minicamp invites, which is very cool to see. That just helps his odds of, landing somewhere. And then Rocket Sanders is going to the Chargers on a UDFA. So again, so many guys that you if you want to like read more about that and like who's going where specifically, because there's so many other guys that have gotten potential, offers and looks and stuff. Head over to GamecockCentral.com. We have that under our football tab on the top of the screen. But yeah, very good draft for South Carolina. I liked, seeing so many guys get picked. I did think Nick would get in the first round, but no big deal. You had 3 guys get picked in the second round, and a very good weekend for Gamecocks who are now making their, pro dreams come true.
Very cool to see because, we obviously cover these guys at the college level. All of you watch these guys at the college level, but for some of them, like Nick, we've covered them since they were in high school, and it truly is so unreal to think about, 4 or 5 years ago, interviewing Nick at Irmo High School, and he didn't receive that many offers to play college football. South Carolina happened to be one of those offers. He wanted to stay local, went to South Carolina, ended up having an unbelievable career, and then obviously was just drafted by the Seattle Seahawks. But it is so cool to think about that. Just a few years ago, you're there, you're at Irmo High School, and then a few years down the line, you are playing in the NFL, or you have your chance to play in the NFL. So super excited for Nick, excited for everybody. It's great to see and just so much fun to watch, not only as someone that has covered the team, and you can speak to that too, Jack, but obviously just as people that went to South Carolina, you're proud of your university. And I know everyone that's watching out there certainly is too. So again, head over to GamecockCentral.com if you want the entire rundown on everything that's going on with South Carolina players heading to the NFL. There's a lot of them, as Jack said, but we've got it all over on GamecockCentral.com. But Jack, back to baseball. I've got a baseball game that I've got to get to here in just a little bit. So I'm going to go head down to batting practice and do some more interviews. But this was fun. It's always a highlight of my Wednesday to sit here, talk some South Carolina athletics with you. And we really appreciate all of you for joining us as well. So have a great rest of your day, everybody. For Jack Veltri, I am Kendall Smith. This has been GC Live here on Gamecock Central, and we will see you soon.